Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator for PHSNE. Welcome to our look back 50 years on a history of PHSNE. The screen is being recorded for YouTube, as you probably saw when you joined. And just a quick screen tour. You can move your mouse to the bottom of your screen to control your video and your microphone. Please stay on mute during this presentation. If you have any questions as people are presenting, please type them into the chat addressed to everyone so that we can all see the questions. And at the end of each segment, if there is a question or two, I will do one question and then we'll save the rest of the questions for the end of the presentation. If you have technical difficulties, please post them in the chat and we'll do our best to help you. And at the top right, you will see the speaker selection. Speaker view is best for this presentation. And then at the end, when we all are talking amongst ourselves, we can go back to gallery view. And so that's the setup, and welcome. And to begin tonight's history of PHSNE, I'm going to pass it off to our current president, John Felix.
Thank you, Dana. This is exciting. This is very exciting to start the new year, which is our 50th anniversary year. And it's amazing what has happened in the last 50 years. And I sometimes wonder about the people who started PHSNE, some of which are still living, some of whom are still living, and if they ever even thought about what PHSNE will look like 50 years after they came up with the idea of forming the society. I get a feeling they haven't. No more so than people today think of what PHSNE is going to look like 50 years from now or 100 years from now. But it's an exciting organization in so many respects, just in one of which is just survived for 50 years. There's been a number of regional photographic societies who just have not made it over time, but PHSNE has. And I thought I'd just kind of review a little bit of the humble beginnings of PHSNE, how it started and why it started. It started in April 8th to be exact, in 1973. And it was basically, there was some grumbling going along with the collectors of photographs and photographic equipment, that in order to enhance their collections, they usually had to go to New York. And there was so many of those people around this area that the idea came up, well, why not form our own organization? And the four members in particular, Larry Rochette, Richard Stanford, Byron Owens, and who's the last one? Richard Bolt came together and said, you know, maybe we can do something here. And they put the word out that they were going to have a meeting about maybe forming an organization to a bunch of people. And the very first meeting actually took place with about 75 people out at the Yenjo Library in Framingham, Massachusetts. And it was agreed to that, yeah, it would be a good idea to have something more local as an organization. And from there, things developed, which I consider to be very, very quickly. They almost immediately formed an interim board. They knew they're going to have elections, but they needed something in place in the meantime. And a board was formed, and it was actually Larry Rochette, who is still with us, was presided over that initial structure. They did have an election about a year later, and John Craig was elected president. Now John is no longer with us, but he is an icon as far as his Daguerrean registry. He has like 87, he had 8,700 links to the daguerreotypists that were in existence. So I thought it was interesting that the vast majority, I think, of our original members were interested in collecting cameras and equipment, but it was John Craig, who's probably an image collector, I would think, was the first president. Matt Eisenberg, who we are probably very familiar with, was the first vice president. Richard Sanford, one of the original people who thought up the idea, was the secretary, and Byron Owens was the treasurer. There were a few at-large positions, Larry Rochette being one of them. Paul Wing, who we all remember, I think, and many of us remember, was on a board at-large member. Robert Pratt and Richard Russick. And that's how it started. Now, one of the first things they did, again, thinking back to how they didn't want to go to New York anymore. Now, remember, the organization started in April. 5 months later, they had the first trade show. And that was at the Hotel 128 in Dedham. And if you look at the first directory in 1974, there were 96 members in that directory, of which 60 would be considered charter members. They came up with some basic ideas and goals, and I just want to quote from two of them, because these have not changed at all over the years, although how we reach them now is very different, I think, in many respects. But basically, the number one goal was to promote an interest in and a knowledge of a photographic history and heritage, including the invention and advancement of apparatus and processes, and the related literature. And I find this one very interesting. To promote friendship among those interested in the collection and history of photography, and to provide an atmosphere within which those persons can share the knowledge and benefit from the knowledge of others. We have stayed true to those principles over the last 50 years. But as you're about to hear from these subsequent speakers, those aims are being achieved in very different ways in some respects, and as they were 50 years ago. So with that, let me turn it back to Dana, and we can hear some interesting stories about what's happened in the last 50 years in different areas. Dana?
Thank you, John. That was great. Wonderful. Sid Chatterjee is going to share with us about PHSNE membership. Take it away, Sid.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. Well, I can hear myself. Okay. Well, I'm Sid Chatterjee, and many of you don't know me because I'm new to the area. I'm new to PHSNE. I retired and moved back to the Boston area in 2019, a few months before COVID. So it's interesting, the aerial photo that Joe Turner took, that was probably one of the first meetings I went to after coming back to Newton. And if you look very closely in the bushes, I think you'll see masks there for the pending COVID pandemic coming. And so I'm being ably trained by Joe Walters, and everyone knows Joe, and I couldn't get a better teacher. And so I have not been involved in China trip, but I do know about PHSNE, did participate in being an attendee at the show. And what I remember back, going back to the Bear Hill and then the other shows in Waltham High School, is the Photographic shows that we all came to, all the dealers who used to come, the hundreds of people, Ed Shaw being there, ever present, Ruth being there, ever present, and then me coming on Sundays when I'd come up to visit my parents, occasionally making the very occasionally making a group meeting. So that's a little bit about me. I'm again learning on the job, and I'm trying to do the membership and run it and follow in Joe Walters' tradition. May I go to the next slide, Dana? Okay. I took the data from the archives and about, as you can tell on this homemade slide I made, on the far left are the 280 members, which was in the 10th year directory. And now I started coming to PHSNE, and I think many of us on the Zoom call now were probably at the shows during the wild and woolly and heydays of the late 1990s and the very, very early 2000s. And the membership, you can see, had spiked to 670, 630, approaching 700. And people like me who were occasional members, would have inflated that number, and the shows were attended. And there's a very interesting article on the history that Joe told me, and in that area in the middle of the graph where I go 2004 to 2012, you see a steady and fairly sharp decline down to 2013. And Joe Walters gave me from the archives of PHSNE documentation that the board began to do things differently by trying to become more involved with online presence with PHSNE. And so the website of sort was set up, a forum was set up. I think it was not highly successful, but it was started, efforts were made. And I find it a startling data that in October or so 2007, when PHSNE membership was in the mid 400s, there were about 50 million users on Facebook. And by 2012, which is the end of that yellow period, there were over 1 billion users. So the way we communicate, the participation that people have, really changed dramatically in PHSNE during those years. Membership declined, and the 40th anniversary directory had 370 members, and it kept going down until the pandemic. And on that slide, I said, you can see now a steady rise in membership. May I go to the next slide, please, Dana? So we pick up from the 40th anniversary, the 370 members came down to 270, but now the last 4 years, and I've watched this and as in the warehouse and being involved in membership, and that we have had a slow but a steady increase. And you can, and it's the one that I can talk about is the COVID bump. We've had that, and the Zoom meetings put together beautifully by the board and Ben and Dana implementing it has helped. The website, that Reich will talk about it quite a bit later in the presentation, has been a big boom. There are people now online now who would maybe never make it to Photographica, would certainly not make the face-to-face meeting, and the Photographica returning. And John Dockery will talk a lot about that later on. So those are three of the main factors contributing to the growth. And I think that's what we're looking forward to. The things that are planned are more things, more involvement on the website, using constant contact, doing more outreach to the members who want to be active in the organization, either with online or in person, And I think later on we'll talk a little bit about trying to do a hybrid meeting with both online and in person. And that's something we can look forward to during 2023. Okay. And if I have questions, I'm open up to one, I think, right?
Thank you so much, Sid. I don't see a question at the moment, so I am going to go to the next slide. And now we're going to hear from Ron Polito about the New England Journal of Photographic History. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Ron can share his.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I couldn't hear anybody. All right, what I'd like to try to do very briefly, excuse me, is sort of give you a rough overview of the history of the journal. And excuse me. There we go. But since 1973, we've published over 3,300 pages. And in addition to that, quite a bit of supplementary material as well. But before we get into sort of an overview of the journals themselves, just a little bit of background might be useful. As John mentioned earlier, there was the photographic historical societies began to flourish in the 60s through the 90s. And we were not the first. This list on the side shows you the sort of order of the first 6 or 7 organizations. Rochester was the first. The Historical Society of New York, excuse me, was also second. Columbus came in, and then a group, which I don't have the exact dates for, Chicago, the Midwest, and Western Reserve, then followed by PHSNE in April of '73. In the 1998 journal, it reported that there were 19 regional societies active at that time. Today, there are about 7 left, including 2 non-regional societies. And of the original group, there are only 3, the Ohio, the Rochester, and PHSNE. So it gives you some idea of the kind of rise and falls of regional societies. This was, I'm going to try to do a quick tour of the journal's evolution. On the left is the first newsletter, which John referenced, which I'm going to use as a starting point, although the journal itself by name didn't occur until 1982. And on the right is the last published journal of 2021. This again, John had referenced, this is the first announcement that was sent out probably in March of '73, announcing or calling for people who might be interested in the club and calling for a meeting on April 8th of '73 in Framingham. The first newsletter, which came out in April, said there were 68 people in attendance at that meeting. And as John also said, by 4 months later, they had organized a photographic trade show, which eventually became Photographica. And it was a printed newsletter at this time. The first couple of newsletters were Xeroxed. On the right is the interim board. Again, John referenced some of these names: Byron Owens, Lou Rochette, who unfortunately you can't see in this photograph, Larry Rochette, Matt Eisenberg, Sharon Eisenberg, Dick Bolt, John Craig, and Valerie Craig, and Dick Stanford, who took the photograph. And another well-published photograph shows the partial group of charter members taken in June of '73. Things were a little rocky at the beginning, and they had to revert from a printed newsletter to a Xerox newsletter for a brief period of time. The first issue of Photo Nostalgia, which took over from the newsletters, appeared in January of '74. And it was basically a 4 to 6, sometimes larger printed publication. And it would continue for 8 years from that point on. September '71 was the first glossy issue of Photo Nostalgia, 12 pages. And November of '81, the last Photo Nostalgia, again, 12 pages. January, February of '82, sorry, that's 1882, that should be 1982. Somebody, I didn't proofread very well, sorry about that. So January, February of 1982, the first journal came into existence, and Photo Nostalgia became what we now call Snapshots. This is the first 10th anniversary. This is the first anniversary issue, the 10th anniversary issue in March of '84. And there are a couple, excuse me, a couple of things that are kind of interesting in terms of the editor's notes. I particularly like the first one that says, by our 20th anniversary in 1993, space stations will be routine commercial adventures. New power sources will be available to replace our present automobile engine. Artificial hearts will be in place. Some things happened, some things didn't. But perhaps more germane to PHSNE is the second quote. Electronic imaging will be here too, but with all the revisions in our lifestyle, photography as we know it stands a good chance of surviving. And I think there's still a strong cadre of analog photographers, and a growing one, particularly among young people. Around the same time, it was, again, production issues became problematic. And as the second quote says here, it says, PHSNE joined forces with the New York Photographic Society to publish a joint publication, which was called Photographic Journal. And one of the reasons was that, as the editors say, each of the publications shared an uncommon fact that readership was too small for vast editorial and printed efforts involved. And so the two societies joined forces to publish this joint journal. They also had co-sponsors from another 10 societies eventually. So it was a very cooperative effort, led basically by Jack Naylor and George Gilbert, Jack Naylor here in Boston, George Gilbert in New York, and information and contributions and readership coming from 10 societies around the country. But after 3 years, that became an untenable situation, and the two societies decided to separate again. The last issue of Photographic Journal was in November, December of '87, and the journal returned in spring of '88. And you can get a sense, I'm not going to bother, don't have time to read all the sort of types of information, but but generally, if you want to go back and look at these covers in more detail, they'll be on the recording, they'll be on YouTube at some point. Should also say at this time that I didn't have time to make a really adequate list of editors. A lot of editors and a lot of editorial committees really contributed many, many hours to the journals over the last 50 years. I'm not going to try to mention anybody by name because I'll leave somebody out, except for one person, which was Jack Naylor, who was a driving force behind the journal from the very start and for about 20 years thereafter. But at some point, we're going to try to get a list of the people who have contributed significantly to the journals and get that information out. Continuing with the journal, the last black and white issue was June '92, and the first color issue was the 20th anniversary issue that came out in the spring of the next year. At the same time with that one, there was a 24-page supplement that was sent out with the journal. So it's 54 pages of content in the journal and 24 additional pages with a collection of images from New England, ranging again from 1839 to 1889. The 25th anniversary issue came out, and again, you can get a sense of the kind of variety of articles that were published at that time. And the last anniversary issue, the next anniversary, the 30th anniversary came out in 2005, even though the anniversary was 2003. But this particular issue had a detailed history of PHSNE's first decade by Henry Reisenberg. And again, you can begin to see a kind of shift here away from informational announcements. The journal always had research articles, it always had news articles, it always had announcements. At this point, the environment was changing. And so the focus was becoming more and more on articles and research articles rather than announcements and book reviews. And this was the last anniversary issue of 2013. Again, it contained a nice oral history of the founding of PHSNE that Amanda Smith and the Journal Committee put together. And Marty Jones and Amanda Smith and the Journal Committee also did a 4th decade review. The next journal will probably, the next anniversary issue will have a 10-year review as well. Okay, to sort of end this, let me give you a kind of brief summary of the sort of evolution of this. On the left, the very left, is the titles: newsletter, photo nostalgia, the journal, Photographic journal, which was the joint venture with New York, and the return of the journal. And if you look at the 2 columns on the right, you can see that the page range changed significantly. The first issues were 1 to 4 pages, went to 2 to 20 pages, and then sort of increased and varied around for a while. But to get a better idea, if you look at the middle column here, where you see that we have been publishing around close to 100 pages every year, is a rough estimate. The big change occurred in 2015 when we began to go to a hybrid mode, with publications costs were becoming astronomical, particularly postage. And so the decision was made to publish a journal, a printed journal, and supplement it with online material. And that worked very, very well. It allowed us to increase the amount of content that we could put out tremendously. One downside of that is that when the Society's website was hacked, we lost all reader access to that material was lost. And thanks to Joe Walters, it was recovered, and Reich is now working to put that material back up on the website. So that's sort of a very quick and overview of the journal up to this point. As John mentioned, the 50th anniversary issue will be retrospective, and it's not too early to begin to look forward to what 2024 should be. There are significant discussions about what kind of form it should take, what kind of content it should have, and we'd really like your input on this. It's essential that the membership indicate what they like, what they want, and particularly what they'd be willing to contribute. Because contributions for both the journal and the snapshots, is always somewhat difficult. The more people that contribute things, the stronger the society will be. Okay, Dana, I think that's it. I'll turn it back to you now.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay.
That was wonderful.
Dana, maybe one question of Ron.
Sure.
Did you happen to mention the Western Photographic Collectors Association in California?
Are they still active?
No, they're not.
Okay, no, my list is incomplete. So anyone who has I should have mentioned that one on the slide. The slide said that if you know of any things that are missing from either of those lists, please send them to me. You can do it at journal.org.
This is one of their early newsletters dated 1974.
Okay.
And membership was only $4.
Okay. No, I'd love to see a complete list of that.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
All right, let's see. Let me go back to. All right. Thank you very much, Ron. And thanks for the question, Bill. John Dockery is now going to share with us about Photographica. You there, John? John, can you unmute if you're there?
Hi, can you
There
hear
you
me
go.
now?
Yes.
I see many, many people I know here tonight, a few people I didn't know. Marty Hassel from the New England School of Photography, John Dockery from the class of '80. Hi. I am the fourth, I believe, show manager for Photographic. I believe it was David Berenson, then Jack Naylor for a while. But the man we all know and always will think of with Photographica forever will be the man in the black fishing Greek hat, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Shaw saw something in me. I was a helper of his, helping dealers get ready, pack up, that kind of thing. He saw something in me that nobody else had ever seen before, the ability to actually run the show. Kind of amazing, really. Professionally, I've never done anything like that before. My first show was show 67. So Photographica was very established at that point. We all remember the lines out the door, 1,000 people waiting to get in, all the good times. Hans setting up basically a 50 by 50 booth. I have a floor plan from one of those shows. It shows 800 tables. And that's kind of amazing. I always tell people doing a Photographica show is like planning a wedding. Doing 800 tables, I can't even imagine this. We do about 120 to 150 tables now, and that's a lot. I took it on. My first show by myself was show 69. Just to give you an idea where we're at and how long I'm doing this, we will be at show 90 this April. One of the first things I did was I talked also another show helper, Jim McDonough, into being my assistant show manager. That was probably one of the smartest things I ever did. Jim's on this call tonight. Thank you, Jim. And then something happened. We were kind of like a transition team to slowly let Photographica go. We all had such great memories. And kind of like the movie The Producers, the fact that we're on a 90s show when we're supposed to be at a 67th and we're supposed to be dead by 70 shows you how much of a failure I am because I haven't been able to kill the show. Many things happened. One of the biggest things that happened was something you might have heard of this, eBay. And all of a sudden you didn't have to go to New York anymore. And you didn't have to go to anywhere, really. You could get it delivered to your house. The only thing you couldn't do is you couldn't see and touch and feel it and make sure, 125 was really 125. So you had to take people's word for it. But it didn't seem to dissuade people. As we just got through listening to all these societies and shows that folded up. I now get to say, gee, I have one of the best camera shows in the United States, analog camera shows in the United States. Yeah, well, there's only about 4 or 5 left. So, it's kind of easier. One of the things that we've done is we've kind of turned Photographica from what you all remembered and loved into what I call Woodstock, basically. Woodstock without the sex, drugs, and rock and roll is a happening. It's a place where people get together and they talk to each other. We used to have people who'd walk around, come into the show. Even at show 67 and through the 80s, people would just come in, walk once, say, oh yeah, I got all this stuff, or I've seen this all before, or oh gee, that deal is still alive, that's great. And then walk up the door. Now we have people come and stay until we basically have to boot them out. They're with people they like, they're people who understand them, and they also understand the cameras. When we had 800 dealers, we had a lot of people there who were very sharp about what they were doing. Those people are all gone. They're all moved on to other things. What we have now is people who really, really love this. And that enthusiasm that the dealers have, people see that. They walk through the door and they start talking to these people and they'll spend hours with them. They don't care. What we've also seen too is that more people are milling around and talking about cameras and photography and what they're doing and everything else. we've noticed that in the last 4 or 5 shows, what's happened is the crowd suddenly became all these used to be old white-haired guys. And now all of a sudden there's a lot of kids there. There's a lot of younger people. And believe it or not, Photographic was probably the worst place for me to try to pick up a date. And all of a sudden we have a lot of women coming in, young women, professional women. They're very interested. There are parts of the city of Boston where it's very cool to walk around with a Yashica 124G on your neck. The fact that you have this cell phone that can take pictures probably better than a lot of the cameras you and I started with. They kind of turn off. You know, the fact that you can make a bazillion pictures in 5 minutes. And they're going back to the old ways. Enlargers are dead, but developing stuff is still selling pretty strongly. So one of the things I did to do this show and keep the show going is I listened to the people who were in the crowd. I walked around the crowd. I was at the show all the time. One year, I did 3 things that I think are very, very gutsy and why a lot of other shows aren't there. I cut Photographic from twice a year to once a year. I cut Photographic from a weekend show to a one-day show. And I changed the venue because I saw people in wheelchairs were having a hard time getting around at the show. Doing any one of these things, I was told, would automatically half my attendance and half my deals. I did all 3 in the same show. The fact that we were able to sit there and do those kinds of things, to ask those kinds of questions, is what's keeping this show alive. What do I see for the future of the Photographic show? I think that pretty much we are in a very nice position. People have told me they go to shows, they're usually packing their stuff up by 12 o'clock. Last show we had after a 2-year hiatus, by the way, I was always told, if you ever missed a year, you'd never be able to pull it back off again. You'd never be able to recover. Well, we missed 2 years and we did just fine, thank you. We had 400 people show up at the show. The other 4 shows that are running probably have that many total. We continue to go forward. We will continue to do what we've done before. We will listen to the people who show up, the attendees, and also the dealers. I have a funny feeling the dealers are what's going to kill Photographica before the people will, because all of a sudden analog photography is getting very interesting to a lot of people. I'm done. So if you have any questions for me, please let me know.
Thank you, John. That was great. And it was wonderful to be there again this past year. I don't see any questions. And again, we'll take questions at the end as well. I'm going to share for a little bit about PHSNE meetings. You can see in the corner a picture of our Kodak coffee pots, which are some of my favorite things that we used to use at meetings for sharing coffee around. Since 1973, PHSNE has gathered in various places for meetings, field trips and special events, members' homes, hotel meeting rooms, meeting halls, museums, and most recently, since 2013, at the Women's Club Workshop in Newton. And since the pandemic, beginning in August 2020 on Zoom. Meetings are generally the first Sunday of the month on Zoom, unless it's a holiday, at 7:30 p.m. You can check phsne.org for details, and we don't meet in July or August. Previous to the pandemic, a typical afternoon meeting might be a board meeting, a mini trade fair, a show and tell, and then a speaker. And many of our members got to know each other by participating in the show and tells at Sunday meetings, which is usually a brief exhibit of a camera or other item of interest before the main event. And it's a great way to introduce yourself and your interest to the membership. Some examples of meeting presentations. Joan Severa, Curator Emeritus of the State Historical Society of Wisconsin Museum and author of Dressed for the Photographer, which is a great book, gave a lecture in 1997. And by the end of her talk, PHSNE members knew the look of fashion during the 19th century and had learned how to approximately date vintage photographs using clothing styles. And Jack Naylor's program that same year on spy cameras gave the audience an insight into the Cold War and a look at espionage camera technology in the 1950s and 60s. Moving into the early 21st century, PHSNE gave presentations on such high-tech topics as astrophotography, stroboscopic photography, and advances in the digital world, and special topics such as Miss S.R. Charter, a Daguerrean who was active in Boston from 1884 to 1844 to 1849, excuse me, large format images and postcard art. The Millennium Series was organized by PHSNE president and founder and executive director of Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives, Ruth Tomasian, gathered a number of prominent speakers with topics that celebrated greatness in the field of photo history. Matt Eisenberg spoke on landmark cameras. Grant Romer introduced PHSNE members to 160 years of photographic technology. Carol Johnson, curator of photography at the Library of Congress, did a program on images of America from the LOC collections. And Bill Becker, the founder of the Virtual American Museum of Photography, presented the 10 most influential photographers in the history of photography. We have an extensive history of international travel and field trips. In 1989, for the 150th anniversary of photography, Jack Naylor organized and led a group of 130 PHSNE members and friends to the International Conference on the Evolution of Photography in Thailand, where they were to participate in the opening of the new Museum of Imaging Technology at Chulalongkorn University. This was the beginning of PHSNE's international travel programs. And our monthly programs began to include local and interstate field trips. In 1991, we traveled for a weekend to Rochester, New York, to visit the George Eastman House and the Strong Museum. Following Ed Shaw's first trip to China in 1998, in 1999, and for 4 years after that, Ed, with Ruth Tomasian, arranged 15-day China travel packages for PHSNE members and friends, some 120 people in all. And in an effort to help reconstruct China's photo history that was largely destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, Ed and Ruth connected with Chinese Photographers Association, and PHSNE travelers met with their officers on several occasions. During the 2001 China trip, PHSNE presented the Chinese Photographers Association with CDs containing 100 early 20th century stereo images of China, scanned by Ralph Johnston, who was one of the travelers. Other outings in the 2000s illustrate interests in old and new technology. There was a field trip to the Boston University Center for Digital Imaging Arts, to Panopticon Gallery, and later the New Hampshire Institute of Art in Manchester for a tour of the photographic facilities there. Hosts Gary Sampson and Beverly Conway demonstrated wet plate techniques by taking a portrait of Dan Jones, and this was followed by a visit to the home of Marty Jones for a tour of her incredible photographic collection. Our host at the planetarium at Framingham State University was longtime member Ed Jamieson, who gave us a show and spoke of his work there and at the planetarium of the Boston Museum of Science. And a little local history, Polaroid in the Boston area. In September 2008, Peter Bass, who was a former technical specialist for Polaroid, presented on the development process for the Polaroid 20 by 24 inch camera. And in March 2010, the Charles River overran the Moody Street Dam in Waltham, flooding the basement of the nearby Charles River Museum of Industry. PHSNE members assisted in the cleanup and rescue of the museum's extensive collection of Polaroid cameras, but unfortunately the rescue effort was limited primarily to evaluating and cataloging the lost equipment. Nevertheless, PHSNE donated 20 Polaroid cameras from its own warehouse to replace some of the 80 cameras lost in the museum flood. And we can't forget our holiday auction 2019. You can see here Jim Jassy assisting Marty Jones with a camera up for sale. And on the right is Henry Weisenberger with a camera. Our special auctions were an opportunity for member participation and an important source of income for PHSNE. They were our annual February members auction, or scheduled during a Photographic weekend, and later during December holiday meetings. These PHSNE auctions provided members with the excitement and enjoyment of building a photographic collection from the redistribution of these classic items, and there was always great stuff. In November 2013, we moved to the Women's Club workshop in Newton. Most months saw a board meeting and a presentation. Field trips continued. In 2018, there was a field trip to the Wing Fort House and Wing Memorial History Center in East Sandwich, a presentation about Simon Wing. And that was the first field trip I took with PHSNE. In 2019, I got to present myself on a collection I was cataloging for Haverhill Public Library of photographs and negatives, which is now online as the Center Digital Archive. And in October 2019, the reins of the program coordinator were passed to me from Jay Goldman. Jay passed in 2022. In March 2020, you can see this is Dick Moore presenting a magic lantern demonstration. It's a great show, lots of animated slides. And then the pandemic hit, and Photographica, the May field trip to the Davis Museum in Wellesley were canceled. And with some discussion, it was decided that we would give Zoom a try, since we knew our members were missing the meetings and there was a way to connect people, and we had, member contacts. In 2020, it was August by the time we were ready for our first Zoom presentation, which was with Stacy Waldman, a vernacular photo dealer of the House of Mirth. She was fabulous. And this was all under the leadership of Ben Kudo, who navigated the early process of Zoom recording, editing, and archiving on YouTube. We've had people join us from all over. Edith Currier from Canada about the Cromer collection, Anthony Hamber from England presenting on photographic illustration, JP Stones recently from Mexico on Mexica dancers and storytelling. And we continue to seek out a variety of speakers and subjects. Our members outside of New England can now attend meetings, which is great. Love to see that. You can search for PHSNE virtual meetings at youtube.com to find this channel, and you can subscribe and follow us, and we'd love to increase our viewership. So after each meeting, we hand it over to Ben, who carefully edits it and puts it up on YouTube for everyone to share. And I just want to mention snapshots. Ron presented on the sort of origins of the first newsletters developing into the New England Journal of Photographic History. Snapshots actually made its debut in this form in September of 1996. Before the debut of Snapshots, the Society's monthly program announcement was simply a one-page announcement of PHSNE meetings. And the new 4-page snapshots not only notified PHSNE members of upcoming meetings, but also provided additional information about exhibits, lectures, and other photo history events. PHSNE volunteers began a Friday night get-together to prepare snapshots for mailing. And in December, other snapshots editors included Pat McMillan and David DeJean. And in December 2008, Bonnie Riegelman became editor of Snapshots, and I want to thank Bonnie for her exceptional work collaborating with all our speakers to promote their talks and gathering articles and events of interest, including exhibits, auctions, galleries, museum news, features on cameras, in memoriam tributes, and more. And members of PHSNE receive a print copy of this every month in advance of the presentation. And it's also archived on the website as a PDF, which you can see. This is from June 2022, a recap of Photographica, Vladimir's presentation on Kine Exacta. And this is a great publication. And most of what I've talked about just now, being relatively new to PHSNE, I found in snapshots and on the photographic archive, the history of PHSNE that's on the website. And it's been a lot of fun doing this, and I couldn't do it without Ben and Bonnie and everyone who participates. So I'm going to pass this off. John Wojtowicz, if I did not pronounce your name wrong, I apologize. Would you like to share?
Apologize. You're apologizing for pronouncing it right. Come on. Okay. I'm ready. Just I don't have any slides to share, so please just folks set your computers to speaker view, and we'll get rolling. Okay. So let me do that too in mine. Oh, never mind. I'll just have to see your reactions. Okay. This is admittedly very, very personal view of what's happened with camera collecting over the past 25 years, and the way it started for me was back in the late 90s, and a particular book. If you've ever seen this by Ivor Mattanley, did a number of books over the years, but very, very importantly, his book on general camera collecting and also on SLR collecting. They're written for the British market, the British point of view, but there's always an emphasis on using what you bought, and that's remained the core of what I've been interested in and the way I get stuff. So the camera that kind of started it from that, and it's not this particular one, but it was the venerable Kodak Retina 3 small C. Very, very finely made. It was the best of the folding rangefinders of the 1950s. Think about pricing. My first one I paid $150 for. This one was jammed. I picked it up the other week, for like $8. For a while, those things were selling in Japan for $1,000 in mint condition. So, but again, that was before the eBay days. Back then, and again, I apologize if I'm repeating something you all know, but the main source was the McCowan's price guide. So that's what we looked into to try to get values of things. The price is, but it's a beautiful camera history in its own. And be warned, the prices that were in here were for mint condition collector things. There's a thing right on page 4 of this edition. We'll find it here. That has in full Gothic lettering. Like I'll read it to you. The price of an antique camera is entirely dependent upon the moods of the buyer and seller at the time of the transaction. And that's kind of what PHSNE was, and Photographic has been quite a bit about. Let's go through these things. The other, so what I really miss about the in-person PHSNE meetings, I really, really miss. We used to have a small personal sales table at all of the meetings. As far as I can recall, and add if you want, the 3 major miscreants at those were Paul Nisula, Bud Midgley, and Al Holme. And as you know, Bud passed away some years ago. Bud was the reason that, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only kid on my block with a Univex Mercury 2. I'm also probably the only person in town who's ever shot and gotten pictures with a Univex Mercury 2. But Bud was fabulous for all of that stuff. If you read the photo, if you read the PHSNE histories, again, you'll find that we were part of an exhibit at the Fitchburg Art Museum that Steve Jarecki had organized called Point Click Shoot of snapshot photography. But Bud and I put together a collection of cameras to go with that. And I had an argument, well, with the museum director. I wanted to do 60 cameras to do it properly. He wanted 40. We compromised in between. But the thing is that, Bud was always a wonderful lending library of equipment to museums that might happen to have wanted that. One of the things I really remember from when we were setting up the show and that, one of the younger docents came over to me and asked, "Why is there a light bulb on top of that camera?" So Bud would take you to those places. In Paul Nisula, you may, if you've read the PHSNE history, you would have read about the Great American Camera Shootout, which was originally 35 millimeter. Okay, and an American-made 35 millimeter camera means that only takes you through the mid 1960s. There was one member who showed up to this thing with very fine infrared landscapes. They had a shot with an Arcus C3. You don't get any more quintessentially American camera than that. Again, Paul passed away at the age of 80 early this summer. He'd had a heart condition for years. So I haven't been able to do this in a number of years, but an annual thing used to be to administer the Nisula oath, and I'm going to do that right now. Okay, everybody raise their right hand. Yes, John. Okay, Ron Polito, raise your right hand. I'm not saying it. Okay, and repeat after me. It's not a crummy lens. Keep going. It's not a crummy lens. It's pictorial. I can't hear you. That's right. Remember that. That's part of the joy. That's a part of the joy of collecting and using. Let's see. There's Al Holme, who's very much still with us. Back in the early aughts, there was a lot of interest in FSU, former Soviet Union. We used to see a lot of Russian stuff, and this is one of the first that I got a very nice condition Zorky. It seems that Soviet Union was doing pretty well in the early years of the Khrushchev era. It's a decent camera, but insidious. These things were the gateway drugs to getting interested in screw mount Leicas. Just warning. You have to be careful. You have to be careful with that. But again, a lot of them are still in decent shape. Not finely machined, but they're usable, and they are fun to fun to use. Another thing that was very much a thing, some years back, was stereo. So we used to buy and sell a lot of these. And I remember Ed Shaw was, besides being a major factor in PHSNE, was also a major factor in the New England stereo photography world and such. So the stereo realist, we all had many of these, and they were fine and fun to use, and that whole organization is also really missed. I have altogether too much class to show you the picture I took of Ed in his coffin at his wake, and two of his close friends are beside him, both giving a thumbs up. This is a picture that would be easily misinterpreted. The reason for the thumbs up is that they've gotten away with sliding one of Ed's stereo cameras into his coffin. So he's Ed, wherever he is shooting 3D, is still shooting 3D. It's part of what we all do. Let's see. Another guy who's very, very important to me was Cliff Schofield. And Cliff was the grand old man of the Graflexes, the really big SLRs. And that. Now, I was put on the board back in the early aughts, and one of the first things I was assigned to do was to talk Cliff into coming up from Connecticut for the 2003 anniversary. You know, that big picture that they took with the circuit camera. I was given the job of trying to get him to come up to Boston for it. And so on the phone, we start talking, and I said, well, yeah, they want to give you the honorary lifetime membership for achievement. And Cliff's reaction to that was, you're giving an honorary lifetime membership to a 98-year-old man. You cheap SOBs. But we talked him into it. He came up, and he gave a talk holding a camera that was not when he had his first camera, but exactly the same model. And most of the time, he didn't talk about himself. He talked about the people who got him into photography and who were his major influences. And as you know, he was another centenarian. He lived until just about 2 weeks before his death in his own apartment or house. I'm not sure which. There are a couple of morals to that story. One is that photography is very good for you. The other moral to that story is that you get a cadre of people a generation younger than you are, which he had. They can help look after you. And that all came from cameras. He was the grand old man of the Graflexes. So where do we go from here? Regarding the early days of PHSNE getting involved online, there is a brief YouTube that George Champagne shot of me, some years back, that revolved around, again, 1930 style sheet film cameras like this, but from the point of view of, as long as you've got some backs for them, how useful these things were to get larger size negative to do cyanotype, to make contact prints with, or to shoot tintypes within these cameras. It's a beautiful, if you use them, you realize how well the designs were thought out and how beautiful these cameras are for use. It's a very, very compact, large format thing. And that talk was one of our early ventures into online, and it got better than 7,000 hits in a remarkably brief period. Now, it turns out the reason for that is I happen to have exactly the same name as a notorious bank robber. So that was there. I'll step into John Felix's territory just briefly. Where do I think this is going in the future? If we have our piles of stuff, I did something with the New Bedford Public Library back in 2017. They had an exhibit of photographs of Provincetown, and I provided the late 50s, early 60s cameras for the exhibit. In fact, we had a whole developing setup in a museum display case. Those are the places we can take things forward. Most recently, this summer, things are opening up again. I have a lantern slide projector. I did a lantern slide show for the Westport Historical Society. And this is where we can start physically physically getting out there again. As for buying cameras these days, you know, those old-fashioned camera stores are few and far between. If you know one and you've got a good connection with one, treasure it. You know, patronize the place. There are good people still working there. And I don't know anything about eBay or online sales really, so I have to leave that to people with more vision than me. So again, this may have been a bit of a personal view, but cameras are always connected with people, and it's the people that I remember, and that's the reason they're important. So if Reich is ready to go, I'll turn it over to him. Or if you have any questions, I can, or thoughts.
I don't see any questions, John, but that was amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to getting out there again, interacting with people. I remember reading in the PHSNE histories that Girl Scouts used to come to Photographica when they were getting their photography badge.
Yeah, I think our best field trip in my day was the one that John Dockery and I did to Providence. Remember, we didn't even get the Ladd Observatory and the Astronomical Resource Center at Brown. It was good. And John handled the bus end of it. I handled the local end. It worked out very, very well.
We'll have to hear about that someday. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, we're not going to let John D off the hook.
Okay, Reich, are you ready?
Yes,
All right.
finally. Now let's make this work. Come on, slides. Here we go. Come on. So if you're seeing this, I think you're seeing it the right way. We're going to talk about PHSNE being online. As I started to say some time ago, Joe Walters really, I think, coached me on all of this because I'm a relatively recent PHSNE member. I've only been here with PHSNE for about the last 8-9 years. But in any case, I've worked in the technology world most of my life, either that or newspapering. And so this is sort of mother's milk for me, but I really have to say that what we've been doing here at PHSNE is kind of remarkable. And that's not my doing, it's all of the other people who have done it. So let's see. What? I'm angry here. All right. The first website that PHSNE built was around the year 2000. And it turns out that the Internet Archive actually has the very first image of the site. And it has, this one is Sunday, December 3rd, 2000 as the meeting. And I was struck by the fact that this was a really well done but simple, back in the basic HTML era. Ralph Johnson offered to design and build the website for the society. And the earliest capture here is for December 2nd. And I gather that Ralph was webmaster up at least past 2003. If people want to chime in on this, who have more historic knowledge than I do, please do so, and you can unmute and talk back. I was intrigued by how that site, that very first site, sort of evolved. This one shows the folks heading for what I think of as a really big field trip, a tour of the JFK Museum, lunch at Chengdu in Westboro. I've eaten there. And going to a Lewis Hines, I believe that they mean Lewis Hine, exhibit at the Worcester Art Museum. And the next one over shows, I think, a precursor or at least an image of one of the many China trips that were run by PHSNE back in the day. To me, it's a real amazing thing. This particular page now will run off this particular slide because there's about three lengths worth of content there. However, by the time 2007 rolled around, folks were getting ready to make a change in, where'd you go? I'm suffering from the worst trouble here. Here we go. For the second site, which was an update with George Champagne and Joel Walters, who added forums and additional features, and basically in a different platform based on what I can see from the image on the right. That site, or that site design, was actually in place for 10 years. And this sample is from 2010. So we're down, we're up to one key factor here also is Facebook. Joe and I talked about this actually the other day when I was trying to cram all the knowledge of this history. And clearly, one of the things that PHSNE could and perhaps should have already done is be more widely available for other social sites. These days, if you go pull up a busy site, you will find icons for about 40 different social sites where you can distribute whatever it is you want to tell people about yourself or your organization. And so far, we barely get to Facebook, and there's a lot of other stuff there, and that's one of the things that our current platform will allow us to do. Going on to a later image here. Boy, I'm having trouble everywhere here. Come on. Boy, I'm not having any luck here today. I'm sorry, guys. Here we are. So this is the similar design, and it's in in 2014. And this is about the time when I grew aware of PHSNE in the first place. So this one is somewhat more familiar to me. The next one that we're going to visit is, come on. That one. As I understand it, Walt Friesenberg and Chris Hubert decided to update after 10 years into a WordPress site. And I know that Chris took on the task of doing that design and replatforming and installing WordPress, which is the platform that we currently use. At the time I first got involved with this, they were on WordPress 3. We are now on WordPress 6. The development for this particular site was lengthy, but it was a lot easier to manage. And this sample is from May 2019. Now, here's what happens. One day, I don't know why I have to have a mouse problem today. Here we go. It's fair to say that something happened when the website got hacked over Labor Day weekend in September of 2019. The good news is that Joe Walters came to everybody's rescue, especially mine. Why? There we go. And so he created within 72 hours the emergency standby site. It bears repeating that emergency standby site stayed up for 2.5 years. It had to be maintained for that period of time, and as you can see from the basic version of it, it also became a much longer and more complicated content distribution platform during the pandemic. About the time we were getting ready to build the WordPress, new WordPress site, COVID locked us down, and there was substantial delays in trying to get all of the pieces back in order. However, in March of 2022, we launched what I think of as the 5th site, Joe's being the 4th. Joe, the PHSNE board, and all the website development team, including Cambridge Creative Group, and most particularly the implementer, Kelly Beth Dollinger, we managed to get this launched right before Photographica this past year. The sample landing page on the right is today's page. It was updated last night. Going forward, what I'm trying to get to here. What was going on with this? The next steps for the site, from my perspective, are to update the theme and simplify the look of the landing page. We have a large set of banners at the top of the page, and I think it would be better for us to get the content higher, especially the content that changes every month or every couple of weeks, rather than the banners that are what are known as sliders. It brings more content closer to the top of the page, and people will reach it sooner. By doing without the banners, we can add many more what we think of as badges or outreach opportunities from the landing page back and forth to social media sites like Instagram or Reddit. I don't think Twitter, but that's just my preference, and a few of the others. And there's more. One of the things that I dearly miss is the collaborative work that happens when you do the journal or snapshots and a variety of other kinds of things, the warehouse team and everything else. I'm a loner. I do this all by myself. And so I really would like, A, to get some suggestions and comments, and B, if there are folks out there who want to be involved in helping to manage and helping to supply content to the site, I'm more than willing to work with collaborators. It's kind of a lonely job being a webmaster at the moment. That's my story. And I'm very sorry for the twitchy stuff going on here. I just don't know what's going on. So thank you. If there are any questions, please fire away.
Thanks, Reich. I don't see any questions at the moment. If you could stop sharing your screen.
I will be happy to make my screen go away.
And
Soon.
so that takes us to the future of PHSNE. Thank you, Reich. And John Felix will wrap it up for us.
Thank you, Dana. It was really interesting listening to all the speakers tonight, the things that they touched on, what was important to them. As far as PHSNE's future, it really is an interesting question. I'm sure it was asked when the organization was first formulated 50 years ago. What is its future? And they were probably asking the same questions that I ask. Will we survive? Will we thrive? Will we serve a purpose? Now the world is changing, and things that I'm sure that the original founders never thought about, eBay, COVID, websites, those are all things that have come in and can be somewhat of a substitute for some of the things that PHSNE has done in the past. Not COVID, that's another challenge. But for example, if you look at why PHSNE was formed, it was basically to satisfy a need. And there was basically two needs. One was finding a better way to add to collections, enhance collections, physical objects. And the other one was knowledge. Now, eBay has come in and we have other sites that people can buy cameras and images on site. So PHSNE's role in that maybe isn't as important as it once was. Same with information. If you want to learn about a certain type of camera or a piece of equipment, a larger, if you went to one of the earlier trade shows, that was probably one of the few venues where you could actually get that information. That is no longer the case. Now there's 1,000 websites that will give you information. Just Google something and you can get all sorts of things. So I think as long as PHSNE can continue fulfilling a need, some need, it will survive. And I think it will. And thinking back to John's Wojcic's comments about every camera he mentioned had a story with it, with a particular person. Right touch on that also. And I think that's still a need there. So as long as we can provide opportunities, and that's a key word here, for people to continue collecting objects for their collection and also gaining knowledge, I think PHSNE will continue to do very well over the years. The other thing, though, that's a necessary ingredient for our survival is basically people who care. Now this was one of the ingredients that the original founders had. They really cared about that organization. And you see the amount of work that they did over the years to get it up and running. They cared. We need that. We still need that drastically. one of the main reasons why we haven't gone to China or Peru or other places and had large banquets and outings and everything is because it does require people caring to do that type of stuff. And everybody's probably a lot more busier in many respects than they were back then. I don't know exactly why. But we do need people who not only care, but want to contribute to this organization surviving. And you don't have to become a board member to do that. In fact, if you look at some of the key people in our organization, and I'll begin with Dana. She's not a board member. Neither is Bonnie Riegelman, who puts out snapshots faithfully every month. Reich, who did all that work on the website, is not a board member. Reich continuously started referencing Joe Walters, but having backup systems and all that, he's not a board member. Marty Jones, who helps out on our auctions, is not a board member. Jim McDonough, his name was brought up by John Dockery, he's not a member. But these people all contribute. Another person is Holly Worthington. Now, what Holly does, and I'm not sure how many of you know this, she is very active in getting equipment out to high schools to keep our organization satisfying the need for people who are interested in traditional ways of taking picture. And she's also not a board member. So what I'm saying is, if you can help us out to keep this organization going and thriving, that's going to be a necessary ingredient as far as our future goes. And I think I would like to. I am optimistic too. Let me put that in place too. And one of the reasons for that is, speaking of Holly Worthington, she sent us an email yesterday, and I did ask her if she would mind if I shared that with you tonight, and she said by all means she would not. And let me give you a little context here. She was at the Native Community Organic Farm with her grandkids, and Holly has 2 large PHSNE magnets on the sides of her car. All right. She was at that farm, and when she got back to her car, there was a note on her windshield. And the person did not sign his last name, but let me read you that note. It says, "Hello, my name is Dylan. I am the caretaker here at the NCOF, that's the Native Community Organic Farm. And I want to say how much I appreciate PHSNE. I took a film class in college and bought my first film camera from Joel. That's Joel Moses, our past president. It was my Minolta X370, and he graciously gave me a roll of Fuji Pro 400H. I learned so much and have gone on to wildlife photography as a hobby. I am very grateful to your organization for fostering my love of photography. Please feel free to reach out, and you can find me," and he gives his email address. And he signed it with a smiley face. Holly did follow up and go to the website and said he's turned out to be a fantastic wildlife photographer. But this is PHSNE's future, and I don't have any idea at all how many people that we have reached in the past that have gone on to go to do some great things in photography. As long as we can continue doing that and stimulating people, I think we're going to have a long, fruitful way ahead. For 50, maybe 100, I don't know how many years ahead, but I really am optimistic if we get the help. And let me say, caring is also, not just volunteering maybe your time, or just a small piece of your time, but also donating equipment. As you probably know, we all donated equipment. We try to find a nice place, a nice home for it. And that's important for 2 reasons. One, we don't want to lose this stuff. We all cringe sometimes. You read these stories or hear these stories about stuff being tossed in dumpsters. So for everything that gets donated to us, we find a good home for it. And we do make some money on that. And that is important because this organization does require a certain level of financing. So if you could donate any equipment that you may not want or spread the word to other people who may have that, that'd be great. If you donate time, donate energy, donate ideas. That's probably one of our most important things. We're going to be putting together, hopefully, some sort of program for our 50th anniversary. And I would love to hear from you folks on what sort of ideas you have or what you'd like to see in our great 50th year, our silver year. So with that, Dana, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And again, I want to thank you for all the work you've done tonight and all year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Jim McDonough has a question.
Yeah, hi. I need to shout out to our past show managers who have brought in the money that kept PHSNE going for all of these years. David Berenson, Jack Naylor for a couple of shows, Ed Shaw, and John Dockery. If it wasn't for these guys, we would not be where we are today. And I also need to shout out to Dr. Jim Hopkins, who was a plastic surgeon from Kansas City, Missouri. Most people don't know about him. Jim collected folding Kodaks. Why? I have no idea. But he decided he wanted to get rid of them all. And where else to get rid of them but through PHSNE to donate them for an auction. And Jack Naylor and another guy drove a truck out to Kansas City, loaded the truck to the gills, brought them all back, put them up for auction. And these were the days when PHSNE did not have enough money to cover its checks. I know that Jack Naylor had written a couple of checks to cover the meetings back in those days. Well, Jim Hopkins' donation brought us over the top and we were able to just coast from there. So a little bit of a shout out to those of our past and our present. So that's it.
Thank you, Jim. I'm just checking around to see, does anyone have any questions or comments they would like to make? Jim? No? Let's see. Michael says, member workshops, using the donated equipment to give people a chance to use, learn, and explore cameras they may not usually have access to. John, are we, the outreach that Holly does with the schools, do we have any plans to go into schools to demonstrate equipment?
Not that I'm aware of. That is one of the things that I would like to get into in the future, because we have donated quite a bit of equipment lately, but most of them have been requested from teachers who already have some knowledge of darkroom experience. So we haven't been asked to do that. But that'd be an interesting place for us to get involved, because I could picture a lot of new members coming in from some of these kids that are coming out. Yeah. If I could just follow up too on something that Jim McDonough just said, that auction, Jack Naylor also mentioned that to me as being a real turning point in the finances of PHSNE. And that took place April 26th in 1985. So it goes back quite a ways. But that was a real turning point.
John, I've seen some traffic around a relationship with Artisans Asylum. I'm not sure what that is about, but they're quite an enterprising group over there, and I keep wondering whether that trail is going to go somewhere, because I know a number of people who are, are members and are makers at the Artisans Asylum.
This is said, the current director, who was at one time Holly's boss, he did contact us before the holidays, and we weren't able to get together because of the holiday schedule, but that is planned, and we have been in touch with it. And there've been a few emails going back and forth. So in the very near future, we'll be together. I know they have moved in the new Alston location, and they're up and running.
Ooh, away from Summerlin. Okay.
Yes, no, they're right by the turnpike in Alston.
Future of PHSNE. I think there's so many things that that we can talk about, and I think if people respond and contact through the website, if you have more ideas like this, or if you want to share ideas for workshops, please do. That would be wonderful. I just want to thank everyone tonight. I'm going to turn off the screen sharing so that we can all see each other. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who presented tonight. That was wonderful to hear everyone. And let's unmute so we can all give John and everyone a round of applause. Wonderful. Thank you, John. And I just wanted to say that I learned so much reading the histories on the website. I encourage everyone to take a look back through snapshots and go to the About page on the website and read about PHSNE's history. It's fascinating. And there's an article also that's a transcript of an oral history from some of the earliest members, which is great. And
Dana, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm also a member of the Photographic Collectors Club of Great Britain, and I imagine other members of PHSNE are. And in tailboards, when they send it out, they have reports of all the different little camera, I'll call them camera clubs for lack of a better word, that meet in different areas of Great Britain. In any particular reason why those, I don't know how big they are and by membership size, but any understanding as to why they exist in so many different locations, opposed to in the States, we don't seem to have those groups. I live in Florida. The only other collector I have there, of course, is Pete Berg, who was on earlier. There are no shows here anymore. The Bill Marta show isn't held anymore. Jim Green's show isn't held anymore, or Jerry Green. Just to go back, not to take anything away at all from PHSNE, but just to let Ron know, Mike Kessler was very active, as was Bill Carroll. With
yes,
reserve.
yeah. Matter of fact, Mike's going to be featured. Some of his work's going to be featured in the next journal.
And but my question is, if I lived in England, I would try and make it to all the different meetings. We don't seem to have that here in the States. Does anybody have any idea as to why?
Yeah, Bill,
Yeah.
I have a bit of experience with that. My experience was with the group in, I got to say this right. It's like saying a Ukrainian last name. It's Wolverhampton. They get really upset if you mispronounce it. God, those English names are so hard to pronounce. And they do 1 or 2 camera shows in the fall, 1 or 2 camera shows in the spring, and they're remarkably well attended, considering that Wolverhampton is not what you'd consider a metropolis. And the core group is about 3 or 4 people, and their membership is about 20 odd 30 people. And they can get a venue cheap, and they serve tea, crumpets, the whole bit. And they're pretty happy if, 100, 150 people show up. But they're remarkably active. They encourage people to not only buy a vintage piece of equipment, but get a roll of film somewhere, usually black and white, soup it yourself, and then show us what you've done with it. They're quite remarkable and quite active, and it's a tradition going back to like the 1890s, for crying out loud. And it's something they just do like breathing. And on my way from, I think we were staying in Oxford or Bath or something like that, there are several towns, not cities, they're hamlets, where there's a core group of less than half a dozen, 20 odd people membership, maybe 30, and they just have event after event after event. Now, the other really bizarre thing about England, when we would, I was telling people, that's right, it was in Bath, that I was driving to Wolverhampton the next morning to go to a camera show. They thought I was crazy, and they actually didn't even know me that well. They thought that driving somewhere for, I think it may have been 3 hours or something like that, was outrageous. Not stopping for lunch, not stopping somewhere overnight. For me, a 3-hour drive was like, nothing. For them, it was an unparalleled excursion. So they do a lot of things locally because they just don't, this notion of going from A to B and those places, I'm in Toronto, driving to a Montreal camera show. We'd leave at 3 o'clock in the morning, get to the camera show at 7 or 8, set up, do the camera show, tear down at 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, have dinner somewhere outskirts of Montreal on the way back, and be home in time for the 10 o'clock news. And I was telling these Wolverhamptonians this, and that they thought I was nuts, that I didn't spend 2 or 3 nights in an inn, So that may answer your question there, Bill. It's a lovely attitude. They're very sweet. They're very nice. I actually got a table at their show, and they were ecstatic because it made their show international. Yeah.
Clint, I mentioned the books by Ivor Mattanley. In his SLR book, he's got a whole chapter on going out and shooting with this stuff.
There you go.
A whole chapter. They're all the British cameras, the 4x5s, but that you've actually gotten a close-up picture of a deer's head is an accomplishment when you're using,
that beast,
something like that.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing, getting out and using the stuff is the sort of thing I'd encourage.
Our journal co-editor, it's David and Louise. David actually gets stuff at our auctions. He gets film. He's got a complete darkroom at home, which doesn't hurt. And whether he's shooting like a 4x5 sheet or one frame of 35, he'll tell us about how he acquired the camera, and he'll say, okay, and he'll do side by side comparisons of a Mercury and a Retina or something like that.
Right.
And it's amazing, and he does it, and it's probably one of the most well-read articles in the whole darn thing. So I get it.
I think the thing we all need to be aware of that for people who are trying to get going with this stuff, it's often just 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of information that they need to get them rolling. Now, my example is with sheet film and cyanotypes. 15 years ago, it was a professor at UMass Dartmouth who just gave me the last 2 or 3 essential pieces of information, which basically were, hey, why don't you use Arista ortholithofilm? You can get it from Freestyle. Here's where you get the chemical. And this is the kind of paper I prefer to use. And that got me on my way.
free information, just little tidbits, right? That
Exactly.
got you heading in the right direction. Cost him nothing to give you that information, right?
Right.
And meant the world to you.
And it's
I get it.
kinds of other stuff like that. You'll
Mm.
it comes with the risk of becoming extraordinarily nerdy.
Well,
You know, for example, the movie, the great romance movie Carol, in the opening scene, it's holding a camera like this, and they've got her loading it. It's set in 1952. They had the Super Double X right, but they had the shape of the leader wrong. And if you start commenting on that to people, they start looking at you funny. So
yeah. As long as they pay you for that.
Yeah.
I got paid like good money to be on the set of something up that was filmed up here called Bomb Girls.
Okay.
And my job was I rented them some sort of a 4x5 camera, some old studio lighting, and he put a 120 back, or I put a 120 back on the back of this 4x5 camera, and he had to advance the film, cock the shutter, pull the dark slide, and then fire the shutter in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
That took a while. that took a while, and it wasn't just because I was squeezing it because I was being paid by the hour. Well, okay, that helped, but no, you didn't do it right. No. Let me show you again. He was a fairly smart guy for an actor. He got it, and it was so I could watch the show in good conscience once it was produced.
Richard Coolish has a comment that there are many books out now about alternative processes and much better situation than in the old days.
That's very, very true. And just think of what I do. One of the very, very best is available free online. It's Cyanomicon by Mike Ware. And just go to Mike Ware's website. He's the big owner of cyanotype 2 chemistry and that. And that's the whole history of he's got the whole history of the field in there.
What's your access to like black and white film, color film, developing chemistry in, say, the Boston area? Is it readily available, or do you? The reason I ask is I around here we sort of have to wait for a shipment, right? And then you sort of they pounce on, oh, we've got D76, yay, pounce. It's very kind of third world. It's become very third world.
Mm-hmm.
Or you got a supplier who'll get some HC110 and then you just pounce it.
Yeah, the HC110, yeah.
Right? It's pretty nuts.
All right. I've basically mail order everything, and I've gone back to college days. I've gone back to bulk loading 35 millimeter film.
Mm-hmm.
But freestyle photographic is what I've used in this.
Our last speaker was his topic was really cool. It was circuit cameras and panoramic photography.
Nice.
So he sources a 9-inch wide film stock somewhere in one of the Carolinas.
Okay.
And he cuts it down 4 inches, 4 inches.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then whatever's left, he can sort of fiddle into a 35 millimeter or 127, right? So he knows, smart cookie. But it's quite an adventure, and it costs him a bunch of money, but he has this film for a while, and he does amazing stuff. So
Yeah.
But he had to go looking for this. He far and wide.
Right. Yeah. Again, everybody else, shut us up if you need to, but pardon us. This is going to get
I know.
worse and worse.
We are at 2 hours, guys, so we do need to close.
You go
But
talk.
All right. Next month we'll get back to the postcard format cameras, you and I. Okay. Yeah.
you guys
Adios.
exchange info. But thank you again, Ben. We really appreciate you helping us manage this tonight. And thank you, everyone. It's been really wonderful. And I'm looking forward to February. And I'm hopefully looking forward to organizing something at PEM.
Yes,
gonna-
yes, 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 yes. A field trip to Penn would be fantastic.
And
Yes.
John, here's a box of postcard.
Ooh, Psycho. Yeah, Psycho prints at night. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. It's been great hearing everyone this evening, and I hope to see you on February 5th for West Loader on 10X. And until then, be well. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.